Hello, this is Grant with my channel Proficiency Bonus. And normally I've only been putting up Pokemon videos, but that's just because that was the first thing that I chose to do. But something that's even nearer and dearer to my heart currently is Dungeons and Dragons. If that's something you're into as well, then you're in good company. Today, I'm going to be applying my proficiency bonus to teaching new players the basics of the game. Now, I apologize because my computer is very slow and my internet is very slow, but I wanted to have a high quality resolution on here. So I'm probably, the audio and video are probably not syncing, and so I'm going to try and show you guys some things that I have written down on cards here or on sheets of paper, but I'll hold them up long enough so you guys should be able to see it. So tonight I am going to be hosting a game of Dungeons and Dragons, and that's going to be live on this channel, just like this video is live on this channel as well, except this one will be with more people. I'm having uh, three buddies coming over. Well, two of them are coming over, and one of them is going to be down down here on the Hangout, and we're going to be playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, we're going to be minting some copper jackals. If you don't know what a copper jackal is, you need to head over to Absolute Tabletop and pick up your copy of the Copper Jackals supplement. It's fantastic. It's really awesome. It's a paramilitary organization, faction, group, something. It's basically like, what if the Expendables were in Dungeons and Dragons? It's a really cool concept. Each chapter is uh, specializing in a certain like fighting style or something like that. The chapter that I came up with is, rather than being really good at making one solid strong hit, the skull collectors, that's what my chapter is called, they specialize in taking out a large number of smaller foes. So like you could have a paladin who, along with his great sword that does 2d6, I believe, that he can also use a divine smite and a thunderous smite, and end up doing, with his proficiency and his strength modifiers, end up doing like 40 damage to one single kobold that has 4 hit points. Well, you don't need to do 40 damage to something with 4 hit points. What you need to do is 4 damage to something with 4 hit points. And so that's that's sort of what the skull collectors are all about. If there's a horde in the area, they would get called upon to take out the horde. You wouldn't want that paladin in your party, really, if you in the skull collectors, because what good is taking out one out of 40 kobolds when we could have somebody who's got a dual wielding crossbows and is able to take out like 10 of them in a round. Anyway, that's just to give a little background on the game that I'm playing tonight, which you should tune in for. It's going to be tonight, Saturday, March 5th at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And the people that I have coming to play, I was going to have 4, but one of my players is unable to make it tonight. They are all very interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons, but we have one person who hasn't played in years. We have 2 people that are more into Pathfinder, which is fine. I mean, Pathfinder is great. But that's I prefer to run Dungeons and Dragons because that's what I have. That's what I have the most experience in. Those two haven't had a whole lot of experience with Dungeons and Dragons, at least not 5th edition. And then we had one person who this was going to be her very first game of D&D ever, but she's unable to make it. But that's fine. We'll get her some other time. And so, since all these people were sort of relatively new to Dungeons and Dragons, especially 5th edition, I decided that rather than making out a big character sheet, I don't think I have a. I might have a character sheet here in my Aquaman and Batman folder. Yeah, here's a character sheet. So rather than like I got this guy Karsk here. He's a level 16 half-orc cleric. Rather than making out a big character sheet, 3 pages of stuff that they don't really need, that would be too much for them to really look at. So what I decided to do was, instead of making up 4 different character sheets for my 4 different players, I decided to simplify it and put it on note cards. And I got this from a buddy of mine. He's my GM when we play Pathfinder, and he made these note cards for the other 3 party members there, because they're not super into role-playing games, but they were willing to come and play, and it's just something easier to look at than a character sheet. He also made character sheets for them, but they rely more on these index cards. And since currently, right now, this game with these friends of mine is only going to be a one-shot. It's going to be done tonight. Later, they'll be able to pick up their character and play in another game if we wanted to. But right now, all they needed was this basic stuff. So, like I said, I'm going to be applying my proficiency bonus to teaching newbies how to play. And so I wrote down a list of what we would need, what a new player would need on a card. You don't need to know their background, especially for a one-shot. And I put a video on my channel. It was the only other video on my channel that's not a Pokemon video, all about how background is such a huge thing, especially for me. But that's in a campaign. If it's a one-shot or something like that, that's primarily combat, which this one is going to be, then I mean, if you got a background, if you have an idea for a character's background, go for it. But it's not really going to come into play, and especially if it's your first game, I'm not going to hold you to your ideals, bonds, flaws, and stuff. So I decided that there would have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 index cards, and not a whole lot on any of them. On the first card, everybody has at least 3 cards. On the first card is their base stats, and here's a card for one of my players. And so I have his base stats up here. So I put the title base stats and then the player's name. And I included his character's strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores, along with his modifiers. This is backwards to me. Is it backwards to you guys? I don't know. You guys can figure out what a backwards number is. If it is, maybe it's just my screen. I don't know. So I put the modifiers down there in case he cared. And then underneath that is his saves. So if I ask him to make a strength save, he'll know to add that to his strength save. Written on the back, I put a couple of his proficient skills. He's got athletics and survival, and then I wrote D20 plus 6 for athletics, and survival D20 plus 3. So then if he wanted to do something like that. These are the only skills that he's proficient in. He can do anything. He can do any sort of skill check that he wants, but these are the only ones that he's proficient in, that he gets to add something in rather than just his modifier. So if he wanted to do an athletics or a survival check, he would roll his d20 and add his modifier. The second page that everybody has is features. Here's the same player's card for their features. He is a fighter, which means that currently he has second wind, which lets him regain HP, and he also has action surge, which lets him use an extra action. Sorry if that is backwards. I don't know why it would be like that, but if it is backwards, it's weird, but sorry. I don't know what's up with that. If it's not backwards, great, splendid. But yeah, so these are things that he might actually use in combat. I believe there are some other features. He's a dwarf. He's a hill dwarf, which means that his features that he gets from being a hill dwarf are his bonuses to his strength, and he's proficient in light and medium armor. But he doesn't need to know that. We already figured out what he has. I didn't write down his equipment, really, except for down here on his, that's features. On his base stats, I wrote down his HP, which is 31, armor class, which is 19, speed, which is 25 feet or 5 squares, and initiative -1. I wanted to make sure that I included both the feet that he can travel plus also the squares that he can travel, because there are some people that you know, it might be easier to count squares. They might understand, oh, it's 25 feet, that's 5 squares, 30 feet, 6 squares, whatever. But I wanted to include both just because. The third card that everybody has is for their weapons. So whether they have actual weapons or fists, or in the case of this other character, her Minotaur has horns. I took the Minotaur character or race from Unearthed Arcana, the Waterborne Adventures. But here we have Ross's weapons. He's got a long sword, which is to hit, he'll roll a d20 and add 6 to hit. And since he is a champion, he can crit on 19 and 20. It deals 1d8 plus 4 or 1d10 if two-handed of slashing damage. And then down, he also has hand axes, which is to hit is a d20 plus 6 to hit, same thing as his longsword. And it crits also on 19 and 20. And it deals 1d6 plus 4, and it can be thrown anywhere between 20 and 60 feet. If he wanted to have both of them in his hand, it says no modifiers on second hand. It was hard to read backwards. So then he would know that if he wanted to attack 2, he's got a shield, so he would have to drop his shield. We've already talked about that. I didn't in this video, but we've talked about that, Ross and I. So if he's got his sword and his shield, and if he wanted to drop his shield, then he could do more damage with his sword, or he could take out his 2 axes and go to town like that. But he knows that he can't add his modifiers to his second one. And that's all that he has. Those are all the things that he has, because he's a fighter, he's a champion, and that class doesn't have any spells. The 2 pages after those are all about spells. So if you have spells or additional class features, those would go in the spots past those. For instance, this player is a monk, and she has 3 key points. So I wrote her key save DC which I would explain to her is if a monster or a creature needs to make a saving throw, they need to beat her DC. Never assume that your players know what something means. Always explain, because you can always they can always say, yeah, I know, rather than them sitting at the table and maybe not understanding what something means, but thinking that it's a dumb question to ask. So, for 1 key point, for a bonus action, she can either make 2 unarmed strikes, take the dodge action, or take the disengage or dash action. She can do all those things for 1 key point, but she can only choose one of those, and it would be a bonus action. For 2 key points, she's the elemental one, the Way of the Four Elements monk, and this was Thunderbolt, or yeah, I think the Thunder one. You know what it is. For 2 key points, she can force all targets in a 15-foot cube around her to make a con save. And all she would have to do is just read what it says here. Taking 2d8 thunder damage and are pushed back 10 feet on a fail, or half as much on a success, and would not be pushed. I didn't include all like the fancy little words in there. The spell is Thunder Wave, is what it is. And so rather than writing, I'm looking up the spell in my book here, rather than writing, a wave of thunderous force sweeps out from you. Each creature in a 15-foot cube originating from you must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, a creature takes 2d8 thunder damage and is pushed 10 feet away from you. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage and isn't pushed. In addition, unsecured objects that are completely within the area of effect are automatically pushed 10 feet away from you by the spell's effect, and the spell emits a thunderous boom audible to 300 feet. You can cast this spell using a spell slot of 2nd level or higher, and the damage increases by 1d8 for each slot level above 1st. If I wrote all that down, and this was her very first game, she would see that and just, well, I would. I'd see it and not quite understand what all that meant. But saying force all targets in a 15-foot cube around you to make a con save, taking damage and pushed back if they fail it, that sounds pretty self-explanatory to me. Now, I haven't completed all of my character's cards yet, and I'm not going to do that on camera, but I will tell you that I have a ranger in the party, and that's going to be the next one. Now, the ranger has some spell casting, so he would get the last 2 spells, or the last 2 cards. I also have a sorcerer in the party, and he would get the last 2 cards as well. 1 card would just be about his, would include his spell attack bonus, which is always 8 plus proficiency plus whatever your spellcasting ability modifier is. If you are a game master and you are familiar with all this, or even if you're not a game master and you're familiar with it, you know how to calculate your spell saves and stuff like that. And speaking of spell saves, that would also be on that that 4th card, your spell save DC. Oh, I said the spell attack bonus was, I calculated the spell attack bonus like the spell save DC. The spell attack bonus is proficiency plus spell casting, but you guys understood, or if you know what I'm talking about, if you stayed watching this video for this long, you know what I'm talking about. I also, on a separate page, include the number of spell slots that they have. So then, rather than trying to squeeze too much stuff on one page, I'd put the spell attack bonus, the spell save DC, and the number of slots on 1 card, and then for the last card, or several cards, depending upon how big of a caster they are, like a sorcerer or a wizard, they'd have more cards, or cleric, something that has a lot of spells, druid, they would have a lot more cards for their spells than a ranger would. My ranger in the party has 3 spells. I can put all of those on 1 card, but the sorcerer will probably take 2. And what I would do for the spells, I would say this is a first level spell. And I would explain to them that in order to cast a first level spell, you have to expend a first level spell slot. So you would just mark that on your 1 card that has all your slots. I would also say that if you wanted to increase the power of your spell, you could cast it as another level, and I would walk them through that. But I would make a note on the 5th card with all the spells if it could be increased. Because there are lots of spells that can't be increased, like Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark, which is the quintessential ranger spell, which definitely the ranger is going to be having, is you and everybody else gain advantage on the target. You could cast it as a 2nd level spell, but you wouldn't get any extra effect from it. So yes, that's what would be on the 5th card. All the spells, their range, if they require components. I might include the verbal and somatic. However, most times I'm pretty lax on that. That's just my style. If I was purposefully like hog-tying my players and they had to do like a sort of somatic waving their hands or something like that, or they had like a gag on their mouth, they wouldn't be able to use their verbal spells. The only thing that I really am actually sometimes concerned about is the material components. So if it has a material component and the caster doesn't have a spellcasting focus, I would include that they would have to have something like that on their person. So that is my 5-card method. Card number 1, base stats, which includes armor class, hit points, speed, initiative, and your abilities, strength, dex, con, int, whiz, cha. Include the saves on that, and then on the back of that card is where I put the proficient skills that might be necessary in that upcoming one-shot. Card number 2 would be for features, and though the features could be a couple cards if necessary, there are certain classes that have a lot more features than others. Rogues have a lot of cool, interesting features. The rangers could take up a lot of features too, or you could have your race take up a whole card, like the monk that I was talking about. The features, half of her card is just about martial arts, and the other half is about what she can do with her minotaur's horns. And the monks have other features as well. That's why I had to have a whole nother card just for their key points. So you can have a couple cards for features. Probably only 1 card for weapons, unless your person is just collecting all of these different sorts of weapons. You probably only need 1 card for weapons. Include the modifiers to hit and for damage. Be sure to include those and the dice necessary. 1 card for their spell attack bonus, their spell save DC, and the number of slots that they have at any given level. And 1, 2, 3, probably not more than 5 cards for the spells. Now, if it is a wizard who has a level 20 wizard who has 44 spells, they still can only memorize or have in their arsenal a certain number at a time. So they would not need all 44 of their spells written down, unless you felt like you wanted to do that. Another thing about the dice. If a player is coming to your table for the very first time, and you say, all right, here are all the dice that you'll need. And you give them a fistful of dice. Nods to Matt over there at the channel Fistful of Dice. Awesome channel. Go check it out. And you give them all of this. If I were a first-time player and I would look at this, I'd say, I don't know what to do. There's too much here. It's a little overwhelming to me. What I would do, especially for this first-time player, what I was planning on doing was looking not at her features or at her key points, but I was going to be looking, well, I would have to do that. I'd look at her weapons. Okay, so I would know that she would need a D20. So I would choose any D20 that I wanted, or I would let her choose which ones. I'd pick out a D4 because she needs that for her fists and her darts. I'd take out a D10 because she needs that for her horns. She needs a D6 for her quarterstaff. And back here on the on that thunder wave spell, she needs a D8. So I'd give her a D8. Now this is almost all of the dice that you would get in a regular set. It's all only missing the D12. But this is a lot more manageable. Rather than just saying, here's all the dice, you'll never need this one. Or what you could even do is just say, this is the only die you'll need. And give them the D20. And then if whenever they say they wanted to do something, then you would have them roll. Oh, I got a 14. Plus 5 to hit with my fist is a 19. Well, that's definitely going to be a hit. I'm going to have you roll this for your damage, and then you would give them the D4. If you couldn't remember, you would just ask them, and they would say, it's a 1D4 plus 3. So then you would give them the D4. You can't ever make something too... I don't want to say you can't make something, but it would be very difficult to make something too easy for a beginner player. Think about the first time that you played a game. Now, you may be a quick learner. You may be a slow learner. Just think about the very first time that you sat down to do something new. Not even play a game. Just something new. Something you've never done before. Well, how did you feel? You were a little nervous. Maybe it was your first day on a new job. And you weren't sure what was expected of you. That's what a new player is probably feeling like. They don't know what all that there is to do. Like, a lot of people don't even understand what D&D is. A lot of people that I talk to think it's a board game or a computer game. And I tell them that it's way more than that. It's an interactive storytelling game where you can pretty much just say whatever you want to do, and it's up to the DM, which is usually me in my games, figures out what you want, what happens. So, yeah, those 5 cards. I'm calling it my 5-card method. Those 5 cards are all I'm going to be giving to my players, and that's all. And I'll tell them that's all they really should need. I'll give them just the number of dice that they need to not overwhelm them, and I'll always be willing to answer any questions that they have. So, guys, thank you for watching this video. Again, tune in tonight if you're interested in watching the live game. 9 p.m. Central Time. We're going to be doing a game called The Ruins of Tartalen. It'll be pretty fun. Well, I hope it'll be pretty fun. I think it's going to be pretty fun. I've been thinking about it for all week. So if you're interested in that, tune on in. And until next time, may all your hits be crits.